I just found out why the kids in my town are brutally killing their parents. Part 5. There's not much you can do when you're locked inside a slaughterhouse facility, disguised as a juvenile detention center, with a friend way past their expiration date. But after being sent away to a place with a guaranteed death like the rest of the kids in our town, it's not like I wasn't fucking expecting it. Coming back to life inside a dollhouse ran by my psychotic fake mother was pretty crazy too. But that's the next part. The piercing red light reflecting the countdown sent me stumbling back. I was seeing my brother's death, which continued to haunt the back of my mind every waking minute of the day. I was seeing intense red coating my eyes and face, choking my lips, his blood covering me, his last words caught in a shrill breath he never exhaled. I could feel it again, a wash of warmth hitting me all at once in the shrill scream of my little sister. My twin was dead. I watched him murdered by the countdown, by our own mother. But this time, the countdown that killed my brother pinpointed the sheriff's son's forehead. Finn Novak, who had been one of the initial kids to brutally rip his parents apart, and the catalyst to me finding out what I really was. That I existed to parents that told me they birthed me in a town that could not have children. Panic hit me in an overbearing wave and my legs buckled, my hands instinctively going to clamp over my ears. I couldn't watch it again. The pop of flesh coming apart and splattering everything in its vicinity, staining me. Now I could hear that rhythmic beeping sound stirring in my skull, which ended with me swiping pieces of my twin from my face and trying to calm our hysterical sister. I had half a mind to turn and run and abandon Finn, but I forced myself to stay in front of him and rest my hands on his shoulder. Alarms were still screeching, and the hallway was filled with red lights bathing the sheriff's son's haunted face in an otherworldly glow. Standing in the juvenile detention uniform, Ray-Bans shielding his eyes, he almost didn't look real. "That's me," he said softly, his lips curving into a smile that was trying to be reassuring when I could tell he was terrified. His body was trembling beneath me. Was that me? Finn hissed out a breath when I couldn't bring myself to answer. When I was imagining wiping his blood, which was thick over my eyes. I had to blink rapidly to make sure he was still real and standing in front of me. I could see him, his head slightly inclined, sunglasses dropping off of his face. In my mind, Finn Novak was already dead, already dripping from every wall. Maybe he was. Maybe time was going faster than I could catch up with, and my brain was struggling to register his death. "Hey, Earth Tamara." Finn's voice sounded odd, like ocean waves. "Am I tripping? Or was that me?" "You're..." "No," Finn whispered, shaking his head, his tone dropping into a frenzied hiss. "It's not my separation. What we need to focus on right now," the sheriff's son whispered in a shrill cry, "is what the heck was that?" Despite the alarms, the intercom continued in its monotone drawl, reassuring other kids that everything was okay, despite guards thundering down the hallway.
"Please make your way to the finishing room, where you will begin your final days."
For a disorienting moment, I wasn't sure if he was talking about the countdown reminding him of his so-called expiration, or the other Finn we had just encountered. Yeah, a lot of things were happening at once, between the replica of my brother who had murdered his potential buyer, and the other Finn Novak who had been dragged away. My head was spinning. We could question that later when he wasn't 53 seconds from exploding and becoming one with the walls. Part of me wanted to go back to Freddy, who had been thrown to the ground by guards, but I had to focus on Finn and not getting caught. Grasping hold of him, I pulled him further down the hallway, tightening my grip on his wrist. The hallway ended on a set of double doors which were locked when I tried to open them. Fuck. Turning to Finn, I could only give him a helpless look. I couldn't help him. That countdown was reaching the 20s, dropping to the late teens. He had seconds. Somehow, the boy was using that precious time to get us somewhere safe. "What are you doing?" I couldn't resist a cry, grasping hold of him, trying to batter the doors down and forcing the boy to look at me. Finn was sweating. Bad. But he didn't look scared. If anything, he almost looked at peace. And I almost believed it until I remembered his earpiece mediating his emotions and turning his brain to sludge. When I thought all hope was lost, which it practically was, the mechanical lock on the door flashed green, a robotic voice saying,
"Access granted."
Before it swung open, I half wondered if it would let anyone in. Maybe it was another rec room or some other finishing room. But then I saw the private entry sign. "How did you—" I didn't manage to finish my sentence before the boy was dragging me inside with him and slammed the door behind us. Now that we were behind closed doors, that was when Finn started to freak out. Maybe it was a proximity thing. If the ear things were too far away, they stopped working or started to malfunction. That is what I figured when the sheriff's son stumbled over himself, his hands going to his hair to claw it out. There was a maniacal twist in his expression, a newly awakened desperation to get that thing off of his ear. "Get it off of me," he managed to get out through his teeth, his voice a sharp cry. I realized he wasn't talking about the countdown. It was almost as if Finn Novak had broken from the manic trance of the metal things glued to his ear and was now fully aware of what they were, and that they were stuck to him, that they were corroding his thoughts, puppeteering him. "Do you hear me?" He blindly reached out for me, scratching at my face. Finn let out an animalistic cry through his teeth when the device flashed green for a moment before settling back to red. For a dizzying second, I drank in my surroundings, which were drastically different from the facility itself. The hallways and rec room had all been one big facade for the real thing, for what I really was expecting. A slaughterhouse for kids past their expiration date. Not exactly big metal cages where they herded us like cattle, but close enough. Slumped with my back against the door, I realized I was sitting on cement flooring, which was wet. And when I lifted my hand, which had been pressed down on that warmth, I glimpsed pooling crimson between my palms and fingers. Above me was a flickering light that thankfully only illuminated our faces and my surrounding vicinity in an eerie glow. The rest of the room was drowned in the dark, and for once I was grateful for that oblivion swallowing up what I was pretty sure I didn't want to see. I was on my feet when the countdown on Finn's head had reached 10. Then 9. Somehow it was slowing down. Or maybe I was going crazy. Maybe my brain was struggling to register certain things and taking everything around me. "Dad." Finn surprised me, speaking through a sob. He grabbed onto my shoulders, his fingernails digging in. When I tried to pull away, his strength forced me back against the wall. I thought he was reverting to the boy who ripped his father apart, but no. "Why did you?" His head jolted again, the earpieces flashing purple, but Finn fought it, tightening his grip on me. "Do this to me?" "Hey," I spoke through a hiss, blurting out the only words tangled on my tongue. I was going to lose him, and I was spending my last moments with him severed from his own mind. "Wake up. I need you to wake up, because I don't know what to do." I shook him, but his expression was contorted in phantom pain from a past I didn't know or understand. wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to someone else, his head slowly inclined, and I could see the agony behind shaded eyes and twisted on curled lips. Ignoring me, he slammed me against rough brick and my head spun, stars dancing in the backs of my eyes. Drowning inside my own foggy thoughts, time seemed to be stopping and slowing down while I was inches from the sheriff's son's face. "My friends," Finn whispered, "why would you do this to them?" "Why would?" He trailed off, shaking his head when the earpiece flashed a lighter purple. The boy's grip loosened on my shoulders, his fingers attempting to claw at his ears before falling back to his sides. Just like in the rest room when he found out about my brother's death, Finn Novak was fighting whatever was trying to force him into a relaxed state, no doubt to make sure his expiration was as peaceful as possible. But this was something else. This was something I had never seen or experienced before. I started to say his name when the countdown reached 10 and then 9. Before it froze, his shoulders slumped, his body going rigid. "Dad." The cry which rang out outside the door was definitely his, but it wasn't coming from Finn's lips. The sheriff's son was still unmoving in front of me while his voice echoed back down the hallway outside. "Don't let them take me away," he screamed like a feral animal, only for his cry to be muffled. "You promised me," he sobbed. "You promised me you wouldn't use him." I could hear him struggling violently. "Let me go. You said you wouldn't do this." Finn in front of me gasped out, his head jerking to the left and then the right. I thought I was crazy, glimpsing a blue flash behind his shades. The light and otherworldly glitter faded at first before glowing brighter as his body shuddered. "Please." His whisper seemed to echo the voice outside the door, and I realized something ice cold creeping its way down my spine, that the two were in sync. "Don't make me go back there." He collapsed to his knees, seemingly mimicking the other Finn's movements. The same bubbling blue froth which pooled from my brother's lips was dripping from his mouth and dribbling down his chin. Ever since witnessing the thing inside my mother's closet with my face, the thing in the box, which was a doll, a mechanical thing, I had been in denial that what I saw was my reality. But then I was shipped off to a place that outright told me I was nothing more than a product, had witnessed another version of my brother almost bought by a potential buyer or mother, and yet I still wouldn't believe it. This, however, was my breaking point. When everything I believed in shattered around me, I was left staring at a doll with Finn Novak's face. A question started to emerge in my head. Was Finn Novak an original product, or was he based on someone? I can't go back there. When it turned orange, his hands came to life once again, scratching at the device. That was when I remembered how to move, stumbling away from him. "Mara." Finn's head bowed when the countdown resumed. His voice was back to normal, back to himself, but I couldn't let go of the fact that for a moment, during an obvious fault, he had synced up with the other version of him. The countdown was slower than my brother's, like it was reacting to Finn fighting it. If this thing is about to blow, that means it's lost control of me. As if his body wasn't in full control, he attempted to claw at his right ear before his arm dropped into his lap, and he hissed out, "Knock me out, and it should stop." He paused. Well, theoretically at least. I must have looked horrified because he let out a hysterical laugh, which was more of a sob. Sarah, one of the girls they separated yesterday, she had a full-on freak out when her earpiece malfunctioned, and she almost went kaput. His lip formed a small smile. They sedated her and stopped Sarah going bye-bye. So, you have to KO me. Theoretically, I hissed. You want to bet your life on a theory? The bleeping was growing louder. Just do it. Hit me as hard as you can. Extra points if you break my nose. 3, 2, but do it, Mara. I'd hesitated before and that cost my twin his life. I would never think twice again. With the one illuminating his forehead, part of me expected the boy to pop, just like my brother. I swung my fist into his face, knuckles first. But even with startling impact, his head lurching back, the countdown was still there. Still active. My head spun. With Finn crumpled on the ground, I crawled back on my hands and knees, squeezing my eyes shut, awaiting the wash of red warmth coating my cheeks. But in my panic, my fingers wrapped around something steely, something heavy enough to cause damage. I didn't know what it was. I didn't care. Before that fucking countdown could reach 0 and take someone else, I slammed the metal thing into the back of Finn Novak's head. This time, there was a glorious impact. 1 turned to 2 and 3, then 4 before the countdown disappeared completely, and I allowed myself to breathe. The earpiece reacted to it automatically, like it was sentient living beings, like it had been fighting against a brain that had gone lights out. After flashing a multitude of colors, the thing turned to a new color, white, before going off completely. Finn's head jolted, and his body lurched one final time before going still. Slowly, I removed my hand from my mouth when the alarms outside came to an abrupt halt. I had done damage. When I pulled the boy's head onto my lap, a scary-looking bruise was starting to bloom on his left temple. His nose was definitely broken from my pathetic punch. But he was alive, his breaths tickling my face. He wasn't reduced to startling red, covering the walls and knowing that almost broke me. With the boy unconscious, I tried another attempt to pull off the device, but they didn't seem to like that. They flashed that same calming blue once again, which looked like a reset. Finn didn't wake up, so I gave up trying to get that mechanical demon off until I found an actual medical professional outside of the slaughterhouse. Speaking of slaughterhouses, in my panic with Finn, I had failed to register where exactly I was. When I pulled an old blanket I found on the ground over his body, leaving him curled up in a ball, I jumped to my feet, scanning the darkness in front of me. It took me half a second to find a light switch, and a further to regret ever discovering light. When the room lit up in a dizzying allure, I found myself face to face with the juvenile detention center slaughterhouse. What I had been sitting on, what Finn was curled up, was old red splattered and dried into concrete flooring. The walls were a horror show, painted in every shade of the same color. There were bodies in front of me. No, dolls. Dolls that were not yet activated, covered in plastic. Dolls with familiar faces. Before I could hesitate, I was dragging myself over to a brand new box with my brother's face peeking through the plastic. Recalled. Behind him, I glimpsed 3 different versions of me. I was seeing my present self, my 15-year-old self, and the future me. A future me who was more mature in the face and who had lost all her baby fat and dyed her hair pink. Just like the notice on my brother, those same printed words were printed over my face. Recalled, not for sale. In my mother's closet, I saw an empty box. Now, I was seeing the reality of that empty box. There was something connected to my future self's body, an appendage almost resembling an umbilical cord connected to the thing's belly button. Is this what I was? I could barely move, my legs buckling underneath me. Mara, just pull the cord, and you have your very own son/daughter. No childhood, no parents or siblings. Every memory I ever had was man-made and physically programmed into my brain by this organization, which saw me as nothing but a product. Pinstripe told the woman buying my brother that she could give Freddie any memory she wanted. Is that what Mom had done to me? Had she implanted the memories of vacations and birthdays, playing with my siblings, fighting with my brother? Endless moments I thought were real with Mom, Dad, Noah, and Freddie. Had all of that been nothing but tangled code and digital images inside my brain? Did I even have a brain? Did I have blood and a beating heart? Or was my body nothing but plastic? I felt myself start to come apart slowly. A wave of emotions hitting me at once. Emotions that weren't even mine. The thing I hit Finn with was still on the ground, and an overwhelming urge slammed into me. I wanted to kill it. And then every other version of me in every box, and the pieces of me sticking from piles of mismatched doll-like limbs. If I killed all of them, would that mean I could take my rightful place? Or, like Finn Novak, was I nothing more than a cheap knockoff of the real thing?
Now commencing separation.
A robotic voice startled me.
Please stand by. And thank you for participating in the Child Trademark Program.
For a moment, the voice was coming from a door at the other side of the room, emitting a clinical white light. A boy was lying on a dentist-like chair. I recognized his face automatically, and my gut twisted into knots. Seth. His arms were strapped down, and no matter how many times he tugged at the restraints, he was pinned down, helpless. His eyes were wide open. My breath caught in my throat, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. All those announcements told us it would be painless and peaceful and natural, that we would find happiness in our separation. They were all lies, because Seth Daniels was wide awake and fully aware, frowning up at twitching robotic arms slowly descending from the ceiling. I didn't even hear Seth's screams. He didn't have time to scream. Slamming my fists into the glass, I caught the slightest jerk of my neighbor's head. I thought he could hear me. I thought he knew I was there. Opening my mouth to scream his name, the words were caught in my throat when machinery seemed to spring from the chair. There was no hesitation or the promised mercy being drilled into our heads through the announcements. No, we were wide awake. The metal arms worked like a conveyor belt, like it had done the same thing to so many others. Seth was just another nameless object being processed. The arms worked fast in quick strokes, too fast for me to fully take in what was happening. By the time I was covering my eyes, my friend's head was already gone, sliced off with one single slice through his throat, a light blue liquid pooling onto the table, mixing with startling scarlet. The blue was what we were. What had frothed in my brother's mouth and dribbled from Finn Novak's lips. It was what flooded our bodies, what made us move, breathe, and think. I saw that as Seth Daniels was torn apart from the inside by cruel blades which did not see him as human, because he wasn't. His eye, which was scooped out, had nerves that looked like wires, an entanglement of the same red and blue. His organs looked to be a mixture of both mechanical and organic. Then came his limbs, his legs and arms pulled off like doll pieces. There was so much blue, so much red coming together and making the most beautiful, and yet horrifying shade of purple I had ever seen. I remember my thoughts growing dizzy and nonsensical, my feet glued to the ground, watching these things skin my neighbor's flesh from his bones until he was nothing but a twitching thing on the table, a metal skeleton that moved like a human. I thought the rest of him was going to be destroyed, maybe burned to a crisp. Because this was what our separation was. Murder. And I don't care if we don't count, if these bastards use the "but you are not human" excuse. When you were brought up and told you are human, given human parents and a human life, that is what you believe. That you are human. I didn't realize I was crying. Screaming into my hand planted over my mouth, tears trailing down my cheeks. Separation was not peaceful or a dopamine rush, like we were all promised. It was fucking cold-blooded murder. The torture didn't stop because why wouldn't it? It took me a moment to realize the thing which used to be Seth was still alive, still aware, and my hands slipped from the glass. This time, I watched the thing work differently, lifting a different torso and connecting it to the skeleton, and then attaching a head with a different face. Older, college-aged, light brown hair. When the body was complete after switching several different arms around like fucking mix and match, the brand new model was injected in the back of its head, its eyes flying open before flickering shut. Something was connected to him, the same appendage I saw in my own box. The cord which woke us up. When the new model was boxed up and placed on the ground, I bent over and choked up the sour bile, which had been filling the back of my throat. When I risked another look, a name had been stamped on the box in colorful writing. Isaac. I watched daintier robot arms scrawling on the label in pitch black ink. Child trademark new edition. Just pull the cord and you have your very own son/daughter. I threw up again, this time dropping to my knees, my stomach heaving. We weren't created from nothing. We were recycled flesh. Doll pieces. Is that what I was? I found myself staring down at my own trembling hands, which could have been any other girl or guy who had a family. I was trying to gather my breath, swiping at my lips when a familiar groan brought me back to fruition, cutting into hysterical thoughts. Ow. When I twisted around, Finn Novak was sitting up looking confused, his shades on the ground. I almost forgot he'd clawed out his own eyes after killing his parents, when hollow sockets carved into his skull found me, and I swallowed another bout of barf. Looking at him, and knowing what we were, Finn Novak looked unfinished, like he had been lying on that exact table, and something had gone very wrong with his separation. But it was good to see him alive. Below his right eye was a bloomer of a bruise, but apart from that, he looked more or less okay. I started towards him before he seemed to move almost inhumanly fast, his head twisting around to face me. Until then, the sheriff's son had been slowly turning around on the spot, scanning the room. I noticed his earpiece was now a dull yellow. Stand by. Finn. What I wasn't expecting was for the boy to shuffle back against the wall on his hands, bringing his knees to his chest and wrapping his arms around them. I could have sworn for a moment he looked scared of me. Not just that. The sheriff's son didn't recognize me, or he did, but not in the way I knew. Instead of his usual teasing and yet friendly smile, his expression contorted with poison, hints of arrogance. Slowly, I lowered myself to my knees and reached for his hands, but he pulled away with a hiss. "Finn, it's Mara," I whispered. "I'm gonna get that thing off of you, okay? Right now, I don't think it's working, but we need to get out of here." I held out my hand to help him up, but the boy just lifted his head, his lip curling. Finn may not have had real sight to glare at me through, but I could sense the disgust in his expression, like I was carrying a disease. "No," he pulled back with a hiss. "I want to know why you're talking to me." Somehow his voice was different, higher in pitch and laced with superiority, like he was looking down on me despite being crumpled on the ground. He cocked his head, a smile curving on his lips, but I could see that he was trembling and hiding behind that fear. "Yesterday, you thought you could just humiliate me in front of the whole school, and now you're fucking talking to me." He laughed, but it was twisted and wrong, almost a tangled sob. "I'm not buying the nice act." Finn's words were setting alarm bells off in my head, because just like earlier when he was talking to his dad and yet looking directly at me, he was doing exactly the same thing. Except this conversation had existed. He was talking to me, but a past version I couldn't remember. "Are you filming me right now, Mara?" He turned his head, searching for phantom cameras, trapped in a memory only he could see. Finn turned back to me. "I hope you know that my dad will sue your ass, and last time I checked," he scoffed, "you live in a trailer with your deadbeat drug addict mother, so I'm not expecting you to win." What? Tim's words might as well have been knives slicing into my spine. I couldn't hold myself back, dropping to my knees and crawling over to him. I was both desperate for him to keep talking and yet terrified of his next words. "What did you say?" He looked like he might reply before the device flashed that calming blue color, his head jolting once again. I grabbed onto him with intention to ask him what he had meant before he cocked his head, recognition flaring into his expression. "Shit." Finn shook his head, his hand going to the device. "Did you get it off?" When his fingers skimmed the device, he dropped his hand. I'll take that as a no. And damn, my vision is completely blurry. He tipped his head back with a sigh. "At least I'm not going to blow up, right?" He let out a shaky laugh. "Nice going, Nancy Drew." When I didn't, or rather couldn't reply, his phantom words going round and around in my head, the sheriff's son frowned. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Finn jumped to his feet. "Well, I say look, but I can't see shit right now. I think this thing may be currently fucking with my head, injecting my brain with la land juice." Oh. The sudden hiss of pain through his teeth was a reminder to him that the device was still very much active, and he was still on a leash. Taking a step forward, he drank in the room. "Wah." Finn's voice was starting to slur a little. "Are we in Hannibal's basement?" Before I could reply, he was already cutting me off. Lost in a tangent, no doubt brought on by whatever the device was doing to his head. "Holy shit, what is this place?" He strode over to a box with my face on it. "Is that you? What are you doing in a box?" I only had to glance at the color of the device, turning a much calmer blue to know he was being sedated. "Finn," I said, "what did you just say?" The boy found his Ray-Bans on the ground and slid them on. You said I was." The sheriff's son cut me off with a hiss. Oh shit. He swayed to the left and then the right, his lips splitting into a childlike grin. "Busted," the boy said in a sing-song before almost crashing into one of the boxes. I grabbed and pulled him with me. Before I could respond, the door opened. Pinstripe stepped through with a calm demeanor, Over his shoulder, to my shock, was the other Finn. "Found him," he said, motioning to the sheriff's son. "Escort Novak synthetic to the finishing room, please. After the boy separation, I want the parts dumped. No need for recycling. Just dump them. I will take care of the Neuralink," he said, gesturing to the Finn on his back. "The CEO has plans to utilize the link in other ways. He is still important." I felt sick, tightening my grip on the boy's wrist. Separation. What I watched happen to Seth was going to happen to Finn. Before I could stop them, guards were flooding the room and pulling the sheriff's son from my grasp. He didn't seem to mind, his lips forming a dreamy smile. "I have another question, Mr. Sir," he addressed Pinstripe. "Are you planning on telling me why there are, fucking, two of me, huh?" Pinstripe's expression didn't waver when the boy's arms were forced behind his back. "I would suggest closing your mouth," he said. "Mr. Novak does not want to see nor hear you, especially words from a defect like you harboring his son's face." To be